Hi, folks. This is Glenn Lane here, and uh, this video is about biblical genre. I remember hearing that word genre for the first time. I think it was in high school, and I had no idea what it meant. It's some weird French word, a lot of weird French words, and but quickly I learned that a genre is a type of literature. In other words, every kind of story, every kind of writing has slightly different rules for understanding it. That's true today, and it's also true way back in the biblical era. So, one of the things that we have to understand to read the Bible rightly is the type of genre we're dealing with at the moment, the passage that we're reading. Uh, we know how that works for us. We know there's different kinds of writing. There's a story. Someone writes a story. It could be fiction and nonfiction. Those are two different genres. Or it could be a poem. It could be a full-length novel or a novella or a short story. It could be oratory. Some great orator like Winston Churchill calling us to action, to arms. It could be an epic like the Lord of the Rings. Now, here's something from ancient times. Let's get the glare off of it. This is a DVD of The Hobbit, the first in the second trilogy that was produced based on the Lord of the Rings stories. That is, of course, different from other kinds of stories. There's fantasy. Clearly, most epics are fantasy too, but they don't have to be. There is romance, primarily about the attraction between a man and a woman. There is science fiction. I know that a number of people seeing this are probably fans of one branch of science fiction or another. Star Trek is science fiction. Star Wars is really space fantasy, a slightly different genre. Then there's horror. I have never been a big fan of horror. It's not that it bothers me, it kind of bores me. So, not a big fan of horror. Well, it should not surprise us that in the Bible there is a variety of genre of scripture. Within this book is essentially a library of books, and even within a book there can be a variety of genre. I opened at random to Job. That is wisdom literature. So is Ecclesiastes, but Jeremiah is prophecy and has different rules of understanding. You get into the Gospels, that's also a distinct kind of genre. The epistles, the books of the law, and so forth. All these are different. So you'll find in Scripture narrative. Now, narrative is pretty much straightforward storytelling, but one of the things about biblical narrative is it's never just a story. It is highly selective, and again, it has its own rules for understanding. And even biblical narrative is different from reading a newspaper. It's a different kind of narrative because it has certain prophetic, and by that we mean proclamation of God's will and desire, elements that make it distinct from others. Then we have the genre in Scripture of law, the giving of the law for the people of Israel. And we have the varieties within the law. That's again a different genre of Scripture. There is poetry, and we think immediately of the book of Psalms and the book of Psalms. And again, poetry, English poetry has its set of characteristics. Well, Hebrew poetry has its own, and some of them are not the same. English poetry relies greatly on rhyme and meter. Hebrew poetry doesn't use that at all. As a matter of fact, I think most of us, if we heard a biblical psalm recited in the Hebrew of the time of its writing, would say, "What was that?" It would be really irritating to us. As I mentioned, there's wisdom. And again, wisdom in the Bible has a distinct set of rules for understanding it. Prophecy. A large portion of Scripture is prophecy, and some books of the Bible that we tend not to think of as prophetic are actually listed in the prophetic books of the Old Testament in the Hebrew way of understanding the three divisions of the Old Testament. Prophecy is only a little bit about telling the future. It is mostly just about telling what the Lord thinks about things and calling Israel back to faithfulness to God. There are the Gospels. Boy, the Gospels are an interesting genre because it's narrative, but they're also covenantal books. That is, they are about the establishment of the new covenant that was prophesied in the Old Testament. And the closest parallel to the Gospels is probably the book of Exodus of all things. Then there are within the Gospels there are parables. And these stories of Jesus are really remarkable because they have their own set of rules to understand them properly. Then in the New Testament you also have letters, and these letters have again their own rules of understanding because they're not written as just general advice to anybody anywhere. They're written to specific congregations in the early church to give them guidance, and we have to get our understanding of them through their issues. And then finally there is the apocalyptic genre, and the apocalyptic genre has its own rules that are again sometimes a little out there. And apocalyptic with these highly symbolic kind of wild images. So there's at least those types of biblical genre. And what we're going to do in these series of videos is go through each of these in much more detail. So I just want you to ask a few questions. Does that make sense about biblical genre? What questions do you have about biblical genre? When we do the Bible study on this, we're gonna open this up by looking at the most familiar passage in the whole Bible, John 3:16, that I jokingly like to call the verse in the end zone, and so that's a opening shot on our understanding of biblical genre, and we'll be making a series of videos more than that going forward. Until then, it's nice sharing with you. See you again real soon. Bye-bye.